Welcome back to the Seriously Don't Do That podcast. I'm your host, Dan Griffith, president of Grow with Dan. And tonight's DDT is don't just fish for bluefin. No, we have not changed the topic of the podcast or the focus of the podcast. And tonight's is really a shout out to my son Titus, who is the fisherman in our family. I was doing some planning for a deep sea fishing trip, and it got me really thinking about this topic. So, David, good evening.
Good evening. Now, I'm getting from this that you don't like tuna fish?
Well, I don't like the kind that comes in a can. I'm not a fan of that, but I do love ahi tuna. For the non-fishermen, bluefin are some of the biggest fish in the ocean, and they sometimes will gather over $1 million for one fish. Matter of fact, last year, I think the record was $3.1 million for one fish. So for those of you that are looking for new product ideas, maybe you want to look at bluefin. But seriously, dude, we're not a cooking podcast. We're talking about sales here, baby. And this subject is really critical for small companies. Don't just fish for the big deals. I've seen with a number of companies that, whether initially or at a critical stage, they put the entire organization's focus, time, and effort into hooking that one big fish or customer. And many times they go home with an empty cooler. I was advising a company out of the New England area, and they had some really neat, cool technology. But they were focusing on one customer and one customer only. And unfortunately, it was a 3-year ordeal with that customer. And that was all they focused on, was trying to close that customer, and they never closed that customer. Needless to say, they ran out of funds and went out of business. But it's primarily because they just focused on hooking that one big fish.
So don't just fish for bluefin. What should I also be fishing for?
Well, so I'm not going to get more into the fishing analogy, even though I could, and I like to talk about fishing. But I would say to our audience, we need to fish for a variety of deals, meaning that don't be afraid to take these smaller deals to start. Many times that's a way to mitigate risk when you're dealing with a company that's much larger than you. And it's a way to sell to them. And many times you could work towards a larger deal or do what we call land and expand. One interesting thing too is the organization can get very demoralized when they're chasing a huge deal because there's ups and downs in that. But when you're bringing in some smaller deals and you start having some success, that winning becomes contagious. I have a saying, certainly not unique to me, but that winning begets winning, meaning that once you start winning, it's easier to win more.
So are you saying to do some freebies?
Absolutely not. I think that is the worst thing that a small or a growing company can do, because it doesn't help you because you're doing something that you're not getting paid for. And it doesn't help the companies that you're working with because they have no shared risk with you, and they really are seeing no value from that. I could spend a lot of time on that, but I think I'm going to do that in another podcast. So if you want to hear more on why not to do freebies, listen to my podcast, Don't Do Work for Free. So this was a short one tonight, David, but hopefully it sinks into the audience, whether they're fishermen or fisherwomen or not. But I want to encourage them, as I always do, to be well and grow. This week on the Seriously Don't Do That podcast, we're going to cover part 1 of a topic that is very important to founders and to technology companies everywhere. It's don't overlook your website.